Well, I'd like to welcome everybody to the Dallas Free Lecture Series, and thank you for your patience as we had to pivot today to move it from in-person and live stream over at the Unity Church. We moved it to Zoom just in an abundance of caution and precaution around COVID. So we thank you for your patience of that. This lecture series is hosted both by D2 Counseling as well as the Unity Church of Dallas. They're on Forest Lane, and we appreciate their participation in this as well. This is a lecture series that's gone on for years in the Dallas community, and we are pleased to be able to continue that with them. It meets on the third Tuesday of every month, and if you are not on our email list, feel free to, you can Google it, the Dallas Free Lecture Series, or send an email, send an email to us at D2 Counseling, and we'll make sure you get added to that. If you're a clinician and you're interested in CEUs, we do offer that for this event tonight. And again, I'll put information in the chat about how to go about getting your CEUs for that. Dina, would you step in and introduce D2 Counseling to the folks here tonight?
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. We were concerned about doing this last minute, but also both Daniel and I had multiple people that were coming forward that had concerns about their safety and their health, and we had people that were getting COVID, that had been vaccinated, that had already had COVID, that were struggling, and so we just thought we're going to need to err on the side of caution. And Daniel, in his unending optimism, said no, because this is going to be resolved in a couple of weeks, and we'll just let's just stay live. And I said, I just don't think it'll be resolved in a couple of weeks. So I think we'll probably be on Zoom for a while. But again, we just really appreciate you all hanging with us over this year and a half. It's been a challenge, and we're very honored that you keep showing up. So we'll continue to do our best to provide interesting and wise speakers so that you can learn from them as we do. Daniel and I founded D2 Counseling, which is Dina and Daniel, and it was actually a little two, it's D squared is really what it is, because we had the experience that when we work together in collaboration, our clients gain exponentially than when in comparison to us working alone. So we came together and said we'd like to form a group of seasoned, experienced therapists that can collaborate and up our creativity and our learning. And we've done that, and we've really enjoyed the adventure and continue to enjoy the adventure. And what that has given us is an opportunity to have a group that serves people from 3 to 93, and that provides a wide variety of services, from somatic experience, EMDR, to play therapy, to couples therapy. We have groups, we have intensives, we have young adult groups, college kid groups. So we've got a lot of different populations that we treat, and we want to continue being able to provide services to a wide variety of people, which is in our mission statement. So if you have a need for psychological services, please reach out to us. And if we can't help you, we'll certainly, one of the things that we take a lot of pride in is finding you people in our community or in the country that will be a good fit for you. So feel free to contact us. We've been doing this lecture series, how long now, Daniel? 3 years, 4 years?
Yeah, about 3 years.
Yeah. So we're looking forward to our speaker tonight. Daniel, you want to introduce him since?
I will, but let me mention the lecture that we're going to have next month also, just to give everybody an idea. We have Andrea Tabor, the executive director of the 12-Step Ministry down off of Northwest Highway. A lot of people are aware of the 12-step meetings that they do down there. And she's the executive director. She's going to be our speaker next month, speaking on the 12-step path for families, tolerating discomfort along the path of recovery. So I'll try and mention that at the end again, but I wanted everybody to know that that was our speaker next month. And with that, I'm going to introduce a colleague and somebody that I very much respect, Dr. Reverend Paul Burns. And Reverend Burns, I'll let you introduce yourself.
All right. And thanks, Dan. And thanks, Dina, for having me. I've been excited about this since I was asked, and it's really a great honor and a great opportunity to talk about what's very that I'm very passionate about and have spent a long time working on and studying on as well. And so let me say a few words about myself. I'm an ordained Presbyterian minister and have been for 14 years. And I completed a doctorate in 2019, and it was in the area of spiritual health. And one of the things that we'll be talking about is that the instrument that I designed and tested for my doctorate, and I did not have an expectation to do anything but pastor churches, but I felt like this instrument and the model had great use, and was learning that it had use in churches and in hospitals and in learning institutions and for marriages, for families, for individuals, anybody seeking to increase or work on their spiritual health. And so February of last year, right before COVID hit, I thought it was a great idea to resign my pastorate and start a company. My company's called Soul Metrics, and so I've been sitting right here for the last year and a half doing Soul Metrics. So hey, I wish I were with you in person, but I'm very comfortable right here. When I found out, I did have to clean up the Legos from the floor, because this is also the kids' playroom, but you know how it is. So let me go ahead and share my screen. I've got a PowerPoint presentation. We'll just help you follow along with me a little bit more. The reason why I started studying spiritual health was because I felt that whether it be the church or just people out there alone who are spiritually seeking, and which is most of the universe, as far as I know, are spiritual seekers on some level, is that there was no great way that I saw to measure spiritual health, or even it just needed definition as well. I mean, I just read an article today. There was a huge study done internationally asking doctors what their definition of spiritual health was, and there's just no consensus about it. Most of them agreed that it had something to do with connection with the divine, with a higher power, or with a transcendent world beyond ourselves. And so, but how would you measure that? You can't measure the divine, you can't measure God or higher power, but you can measure from a psychological perspective, you can measure the impact that it has to believe in such a higher power, whether that be a loving presence or a judging presence, whatever you believe about God impacts the way you view yourself, your sense of self-worth, whether or not you can trust others. So it impacts your relationships with yourself and others as well. And so, what I did is develop a set of metrics and a model and an instrument to measure spiritual health. And so, but at the cornerstone of this model is measuring what our quality of attachment is with God or higher power, and in general, what our attachment style is, because our our attachment style has a lot to do with how we approach all of our relationships. It has a lot to do with how we view ourselves and whether or not we can trust other people, no less an invisible being. So I looked at this through the lens of attachment. So I've been working on my understanding of attachment theory and then applying it more and more to our relationship with God. And so tonight, what we're going to work, I've developed an exercise. I'm going to show you that exercise. It's really very simple exercise to help you evaluate how your attachments are working for you. And we'll get into what that would look like. But so I hope for you tonight to come away with some knowledge about at least a way of looking at spiritual health, a model for spiritual health. Hear a little bit about an instrument that measures spiritual health that you would have the opportunity to take if you wish, and give you an exercise that will help you to increase your spiritual health. So rethinking your attachments is the name of the exercise and the name of our talk tonight, a step towards greater spiritual health. I think it's what the world needs. The world needs a better way of relating to a higher power, but also to self and to other. And let's see, make technology work. Okay, so let's just start with what is spiritual health. I'm looking at this through first through a biblical lens, through a Christian lens as well. And I'm going to share with you some of the other lenses that I've brought into this, but let's just start with a biblical lens. When you read the Bible from, whether it's in Genesis or all the way to Revelation, of everything in between, and particularly when you focus on the figure of Jesus and Jesus's teachings, it is about relationships. The Ten Commandments about relationships. It's how to have a relationship with God and how to have a relationship with your community. And so when Jesus, for instance, was asked, what's the most important commandment? And he said, the first is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And second, like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. This thing is about relationship. Okay, well, somebody didn't like what I was saying already. Gosh, come on. Keep it in the chat box, people. So it's about love and relationships with God, neighbor, and self. And so love your neighbor as yourself. And I find in my experience that we love our neighbor about as well as we love ourselves. And so if you don't love yourself very well, then it kind of comes out in your relationships with others. So spiritual health is the level of which we receive the love of God or higher power, are transformed by it, and exhibit the love of God or higher power to others. That's very, very basic. So I just think of a movement here from God to us, through us, and out into the world. And so is the love of the higher power coming into you and through you out into the world? And God can love the world directly, however God chooses to love the world. But I think the way he chose to love the world is through human beings. In fact, that is the story of Jesus, which is that God entered into human flesh to show what love is. So that's spiritual health, by my definition. So, and just another extra, Jesus said, so how would you measure spiritual health? And Jesus gives us, first and foremost, the basic measurement. By this, everyone you will know you are my disciples if you love one another. Anything that doesn't involve loving one another does not represent Jesus and the God that Jesus represents, does not represent God. And so whatever religion is or isn't, if it isn't loving, if it isn't producing love, then it is not of God, by my view. So that's the first measure. So it is about love. Well, it's always a little bit more complicated than that. But the question is, how, so if that's how we measure spiritual health is about love, how are we doing? And this was a study, and it's limited to Christians, and it's in North America, done by George Barna, completed in 2000 and published in 2011, and wanting to kind of see how Christians were doing in their spiritual progress. Something that we don't talk a lot about. We talk a lot about it in 12-step programs. We claim spiritual progress. That's part of a 12-step program. But so what they found in a 6-year-long intense study, they found that only 18% of professed Christians committed to spiritual development. So 82%, it's just not a thing. I'm saved, I'm going to heaven, and just let me be until I get there and get my golf course in the sky, or however people want to imagine it. So 18%. Well, in my book, if you're not committed to something, you probably aren't going to grow in that area. It doesn't happen just by accident. And that is why they report only 10% of Christians report significant transformation. Any change because of their faith in Christ, in God. And so as a result, and this is the saddest fact of all, only 0.5%, 0.5% of Christians exhibit a profound love of people. And along with that is only 0.5% experience a deep, loving relationship with God. So 99.5% of professed Christians in this country don't really experience and do the thing that Jesus taught us to do. And so it's a wonder that we have a reputation problem in the church, is because we're not modeling our leader, the model. So that's the problem that I'm tackling, and it's not just for the church and for Christians. This is something that I hope that all people can experience love, to receive and give love. That is what, and if it's just between you and your spouse, or you and yourself, I'm just as interested in that as I am with your relationship with God, because they all connect one way or another. So how does one love like Christ? Well, it seems nearly impossible, and yet there have been instances of Christ-like sacrificial love throughout history. And it happens to this day. It doesn't make the news very often, but it happens. I've experienced it. People have loved me greatly. But so to love like Christ, or to do anything like anybody, we must have the character of one who loves like Christ. You don't just go out and start and make that happen. Our character has to do with we live out of our character. In fact, we're never out of character. As they say, well, that was really out of character for you, Paul. No, it was right on track. You just didn't know all of my character. Our character is very honest, and it comes out in our actions, and particularly in the way we treat people, our character. And so we have perhaps a character problem. Do we have the character of one who loves? So I begin to look at the problem. Well, perhaps the problem is that if we aren't attached to the source of love, if God is love, you believe that God is love, or a higher power is love, and you have no attachment to that, then perhaps you aren't receiving that love, or learning about that love, or experiencing that love. Jesus said to the woman at the well, those who drink of the water that I will give them will never be thirsty. The water that I will give will become in them a spring of water gushing up to eternal life. That's the thing that I most want to see in myself and others. I want to see life and love gushing up out of my character. And I've got a faucet there because, I think that we perhaps, for those that attend worship services, go and they get a little cup and they open up the faucet and then they get a little bit of love or God or life, and then they're parched by Monday. But we have to attach our lives. So more like a hose is attached to that so that water can be flowing, the life of God can be flowing through us. So that brings us to the subject of attachment, which we'll get to briefly. So, but what if you're attached? What if you're praying every day? What if you meditate all the time and consider a compassionate, loving God, and you still struggle? Well, then there's perhaps something inside, that is keeping your the love from flowing through and out of you. So is the love that we're receiving from higher power pouring out into our relationships, into strangers, neighbors, co-workers? And if not, perhaps like this pipe we're looking at, perhaps there's a clog. Just think medically for a second. If you had a blood flow problem, they would probably examine your heart and they may find a blockage. And if there's a blockage, then they have to insert a stent or something, or give you medicine to help clear the blockage so that blood could flow through you so that your oxygen can get to all parts of your body. And so I think that love is the same way, and there are blockages, and we'll go through some of those blockages. So here are some of the areas of my research. First, looking at the Bible as a model for who God is, as a loving, forgiving, redeeming, relational God. And so I learned about who God is through the Bible. But what about human beings? Well, you learn something about human beings in the Bible too. But there's been advancement in our understanding of human beings. Neuroscience has made huge advances in the last 20 years. They know more about the brain than ever, and it's exponential compared to 50 years ago. But it has confirmed a lot of the theory of psychology, like attachment theory, is now much more in vogue today, and it is because of the brain science backs it up totally. So psychology is the study of the soul. So my company's name is Soul Metrics. So the soul is important to me, the human soul, the psyche. And so there's particularly attachment theory, but also family systems therapy, family systems theory as well. And then lastly, emotional intelligence, which is just something that has been blossoming in the last 20 years as well. It's being used in places of business in the corporate world big time, and it's helping leaders and doctors to become more empathetic and compassionate in their leadership style, learning to connect and lead through that connection as well. And yet it hasn't made its way into religious systems as much. So my hope was to bring that. Essentially what this model is that comes out of this is emotional intelligence with a spiritual dimension. So emotional intelligence is about intrapersonal and interpersonal relationships. But what about the divine relationship? And that's where our model comes in. So I began to compile, a list of competencies and, how would you measure this spiritual intelligence thing that I refer to as spiritual health. I've conducted two 700 participant studies based on the questionnaire my initial questionnaire. And we've done a statistical analysis, confirmatory and reliability studies on the data. And what was created was a valid and reliable instrument, a psychometrically sound instrument afterwards. And I've been using it, and it is proven to be very accurate just from an anecdotal point of view as well. I've trained over 40 coaches, spiritual directors, and counselors in this that are also using this. And I have used it with over 150 Christian leaders in the last year. And I'm seeing lots of healing and growth through it. And so here's what we came up with, is this model. So we've got 3 primary factors: quality of attachment to God, level of self-differentiation, which we won't get into today, but is essentially your sense of self, your ability. It's the opposite of codependency. It's your ability to separate your feelings and thoughts and perspectives from other people, and to know who you are and to act out of your identity. And then lastly, capacity to empathize. This is how you relate to the world. How, I think of empathy as the pathway of God's love through our empathy. And within those categories, we have these subcategories: trust in God, communication, God, sensing God's presence, receiving and giving forgiveness, ability to regulate emotions, willingness to be vulnerable, listening, which, by the way, is the lowest average score. This is a struggle. It is hard to be vulnerable. Listening to others, feeling what others are feeling, and responding with loving action. But what we're going to dive into is this attachment stuff, and how it relates to God and our other relationships. In general, when we talk about clogs, these are the clogs. It's a lack of trust in God, a lack of communication with God, a lack of perception of God's nearness, and these are the big ones right here: a lack of forgiveness, a lack of emotional regulation, and a lack of vulnerability. Those 3 in the middle are the 3 big clog areas that are keeping love from coming through us. Listening to others, a lack of feeling what others are feeling, and a lack of loving action that we call empathy. And so these are the clogs that I'm working with in myself and other people and groups and whole communities. All right. So what's attachment? In the psychological context, it is behavior. Very simply, it is the drive to seek to be close to one's mother or other or primary attachment figure for the sake of safety first, and then for the sake of growth, or just basically nourishment. This is one of the few kind of human instincts that we're born with. I mean, other animals, they come out, they're almost ready to go. I mean, they're up on their legs and they're running, and they can defend themselves to some degree, and they can feed themselves to some degree. But as human babies, we are inert. We are incapable of following our parents for the sake of safety. So unlike animals, humans have very inconsistent attachment patterns, because it has to do with how the parent responds to the child, not the child responding to the parent. So we're all imperfect in the way we've responded to our children, and our parents were imperfect as well. So it causes some problems. But so safety and growth is kind of the evolutionary part of this. This is how we evolved as mammals, is to need the protection of our parents. So what is it? Attachment can happen with anything, a person, a place, a thing, or an activity. It's especially as adults, an attachment behavior continues on into adulthood. But it's anything that we seek out to give us comfort or safety. Yeah, most kids, they seek out mom or dad for it, but some a blanket or, a teddy bear. That's attachment. As an adult, particularly when we replace relationship, attachment in relationship, it gets replaced by things like alcohol and drugs and sex, pornography. These are things that can become attachments, but not healthy attachments. And they often are what are replacing a relationship with anybody. But it gives us comfort to seek our attachment figure. Hey, I feel I'm very thankful that I can still pick up a phone and call my mom. And it comforts me. And I'm likely to do it on a stressful day. I'm thankful to have a wife who I can seek out. She gives me comfort. That's an attachment. So the question, though, is, so all attachments give us some kind of comfort. But the question in terms of what is a healthy attachment is this attachment helping you and encouraging you to grow? By the way, alcohol doesn't do that. Overeating doesn't do that. Football doesn't do that. Whatever it is, attachment. And so I just, let's utilize the chat box for just a moment here. Can you name a few attachments that do not lead to healthy growth? I've named a few. I'll just read them out loud as you write them in. Sex, drugs, work, rock and roll. I don't know about that. Internet, TV, Netflix. But there's some comfort at the end of the day. Just some mindless shopping. Better believe it. Exercise. Sometimes healthy, sometimes not. Chocolate. That promotes growth, but not the kind of growth you want. Great examples. Thank you for sharing. Okay. So are you growing? What impact does attachment then have on our character? And this is where we're starting to get down to the heart of this question about how do we have the character of one who loves or loves like Christ, if that's your example. And here is what the world of science, psychology and neuroscience, as said, we grow into the image of our attachments for better or for worse. Now, my theology says that I'm created in the image of God, right? I am created in the image of God, but I have grown into the image of my attachments because that's how I survive, to please my mom, to please my dad so that they would feed me. I mean, that's just an instinctual drive. I became something like the people I thought they wanted me to be. So I grew into the image of my attachment figures, right? I mean, and it could be a celebrity, I mean, if the president of the United States or somebody like that is the most important person in your life, you're going to kind of become like them. You will idolize them. That's what idolatry is, in a sense. So we grow into the images of our attachment for better or for worse. And so we are who we are today, largely because of the attachments that have influenced us, that we have wanted to be like. So what impact does attachment have on our character? I'll ask the question again and say it in a different way. So attachment begins with being loved, being cared for. In fact, but we'll attach to abusive parents as well. But attachment begins with a parent that shows us something about ourselves. In fact, I mean, our parents are answering two questions for us that are the basis of our belief system from a very early age. And the two questions are, one, am I worthy of love? That's answered by how we're cared for or not. And two, can I trust others to love me? That's how attachment begins. It begins with being loved, but character forms by whom we return love to. That's when we begin to be like something or someone, is what we love back. And you may not love back your parent. They may not have a lot of influence over your identity. But Mary Ainsworth, a very key attachment theorist, said, in hatred as in love, we grow like the thing we brood upon, the thing we pay attention to the most, hate or love. What we loathe, we graft into our very soul. So even hatred can be an attachment response that forms your character. Be careful who you hate, because they will be shaping you in ways that you don't want. But think about who you love and what you love, because that is what is shaping your character the most. So Jim Wilder is a neuroscientist. He's an interesting bird. He's got a PhD in neuroscience, but he's got a master's in theology, and he's a licensed counselor. So Dan Gowan has got to be, is somewhere in his league. But Jim Wilder said, the brain functions that determine our character are most profoundly shaped by who we love. That's brain science. There's this, it's like, to change our character, it's like there's a protection. It's like it's password protected, but the password is love. And when we love something, it opens up our brain for a change, for better or for worse. And the change is toward the direction of that attachment, the person or thing we love. So how do you change your character? A huge question in the world today. Well, Wilder's answer is changing character, as far as the brain is concerned, means attaching in new and better ways. So if our attachments are what's shaping our character, then changing character is about changing or relating differently to our attachments. Here's one of the things I'm looking for in my clients. I think I see a question coming up here. Character has many meanings. It shapes you personality, your ability to be a good and giving person. Yeah, and character and personality I don't think are necessarily the same thing. Personality has a lot of traits, and character is more about verbs than nouns, I would say. So the thing I'm looking for in my clients are whether or not they have healthy attachments with God and or others that give them the safety and freedom to grow into a loving character, do they have, and that's ultimately what a healthy attachment does. It encourages growth. It doesn't control, but it gives freedom. A scripture comes to mind: for freedom Christ has set us free. And yet Christianity has not been a religion known for freedom creating in human beings, but at its best, that's what it should be if it is a healthy version of Christianity. So that's what I'm looking for. They can't change. They're not going to be able to change if they don't have an attachment that supports that change. It's like a sponsor. If you don't have, if growth is not being sponsored in your life, it probably is going to be inhibited. So beginning to rethink your attachments is what we're moving towards here. So here's just a question that I love to ask people, and I ask you today. This is how you begin to evaluate whether an attachment is good for you. How does your relationship with blank aid you in deepening your relationship with God, your higher power, and growing into the image of God or authentic self? How does your relationship with blank aid you in that? And if it doesn't, maybe it's not an attachment worth your effort and energy. And it might just be kind of one of those, it doesn't aid it or inhibit it. Okay, that's fine. But so here's an exercise to go a little bit further. Now that's a good starting place. So I urge you to try this when you get some time. This actually won't even take much time. There's 6 steps. 1, list your top 5 attachments, or you might call it your top 5 values or priorities. They could be in there too, but people, places, and things. And list your top 5 attachments in order of significance for you. Maybe God's in there, maybe God's not in there. But list them and rank them, top 5. Number 2, list ways that these attachments impact you for better or for worse. 3, think about how and when did the attachment begin? Some of that you may not remember. You assume that it began at birth with your mother, or in the first 18 months. But like I have an attachment to cooking. I love cooking and eating. I love eating. Where did that begin? Well, of course I was fed as a child, but food was an important thing to me growing up, necessary for survival. But it really became a big thing when the father of my first wife, we used to cook all the time, and he loved to cook, and he taught me a lot about cooking, and he introduced me to a lot of new foods and things like that. And so that attachment kind of is attached to that relationship. And when that relationship ended, then it really caused some weird problems. So in a way, and I did this unknowingly for years, is my love of cooking was in a way to keep my love of this man alive. And my anxiety about failing in cooking in some way was related to that as well. But so see if you can identify how and when the attachment began. It will give you some interesting thought. At least a subject for your next therapy session. Number 4, grade each attachment, scale of 1 through 10. I like measurement. 10, highest level of agreement. 1, strongest level of disagreement on your level to the statement that we had before. This attachment aids me in deepening my relationship with God, higher power, and growing into the image of God or authentic self. What 1 to 10? How does football, another one of my attachments, aid me in that? Or how does my relationship with my wife aid me in that? Or how does work aid me in that? And put a score on there. 5, consider how you might reprioritize your attachments based on the grades. A client of mine that did this, she had a real struggle, and the struggle was that she had retired, and her plan for retirement was to travel with her husband, but her daughter needed help with her new baby, and so she is essentially raising this child. It's a necessity, but she was angry about it. And she did this exercise, and she had travel as one of her attachments, and she had this baby boy as one of her attachments. And when she graded it, the thing that the attachment of her 5 that helped her most in deepening her relationship with her higher power and becoming the person she was created to be, her authentic self, her most loving self, was her relationship with her baby grandson. It wasn't travel. And so she's like, all of a sudden I realized I had misprioritized these attachments. And so she moved the grandson first, and all of a sudden the anger went away because she accepted this as something given to her by God and something that made her happy if she allowed herself to accept it. So consider how you might reprioritize your attachments based on the grades. And then lastly, very importantly, reevaluate your relationship with any attachments that are working directly against your relationship with your higher power and growing into your authentic self, growing into the image of God that God intended within you, or however you want to put it. You could use this for all kinds of goals, by the way. You could say, reevaluate your relationship with any attachments that are working directly against your goal to become a best-selling author, better father, CEO of your company, whatever it is. Whatever is important to you right now, or your clients. We just need to get rid of stuff sometimes. And sometimes relationships have an ending point if they are working against us in that way. Or we might just need to renegotiate terms. So that is the exercise. I want to address something else that's really hard, I think, in all of this. And it's something I always want to make sure I say in every time I get a chance to talk. So what if you find it hard to trust anybody? We're back to just talking more generally about spiritual health, no less an invisible God. That, what if your trust has been broken, and attachments in general are a struggle for you? So here's the thing. When our trust is broken by another person, it literally breaks down the connections in our brain that give us the ability to trust. So broken trust is broken brain. It's damage to the brain. It's a disintegration of the brain, the right and the left and the front and the middle and the back. And, memory is affected. All kinds of everything is affected on some level by broken trust, but particularly the things that allow us to have a loving relationship, which is what spiritual health essentially is about. So when you think of a broken trust as broken brain and not just some kind of ephemeral thing you can't get at, I'm just not a trusting person. Well, no, you weren't made to be to be an untrusting person, but it's been broken. So here's an amazing thing that has come out of the work of really Daniel Siegel, but Kurt Thompson, kind of took some things a step further, at least towards my model, is he takes it from more of a spiritual point of view. So this is how you restore a broken trust system. Transformation requires a collaborative interaction. What would that be? Two people talking? With one person emphatically listening and responding to the other so that the speaker has the experience, perhaps for the first time, of feeling felt by another. That's the very thing this isn't brain surgery. It is brain science. But anybody can do this for another person, is to heal a broken trust system. Requires your ears a lot more than your mouth. It requires your empathy a lot more than your head knowledge. And so, the work of counseling and therapy and just the work of listening in general and creating a safe space for somebody is about the best thing we could do on this planet for one another. It's about the most loving thing we can do for another person. I once heard, I forget who said it, that being listened to well feels a lot like being loved. That's the world needs more of this. So then he goes on a little bit and he says, the interpersonal interaction exposes these functions of the mind and facilitates the integration of various layers of neural structures and brain systems, which in turn creates new neural networks. The firing patterns of these networks, though previously potentially available, did not exist before such interactions took place. In other words, you were born with everything you need in your brain to have loving, fulfilling, trusting relationships. But if it wasn't hooked up, by your mom and your dad, or if it was disrupted by trauma, then it doesn't work. But what hooks it up for the first time or rehooks it up is this collaborative interaction of listening and encouragement and being felt by another person. So in other words, we don't, as Brene Brown said, we don't have to do it alone. We were never meant to. You cannot go learn your way into spiritual health. You cannot learn your way into being a loving person. Book learning is not going to do this. That is a left brain activity that isn't going to get you there. This is right brain work primarily, and that is done in relationship. And so wherever you are and whatever you're experiencing, if you are wanting to get better in loving, in receiving love and giving love, whether it be with God, yourself, or other people, you need a partner to do that. And I just want to say D2 counseling is an incredible gift to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Anytime somebody asks me for a referral, I always refer to D2 counseling. You might not like Dan, I don't know, but there'll be somebody there that is going to be a fit for you, or they'll have a referral for you. But they will partner with you in this kind of work. Another step you can take is to take the GPS. The GPS, God, Personal, Social, Spiritual Inventory. And you can take it at my website, www.soul-metrics.com. What it will do is give you a point in time picture of what your spiritual health looks like. What is the health of your soul at this point of time, having just been through a year and a half of COVID and political upheaval and all these things, or a loss of a loved one, or trauma, any of these things, they all impact our spiritual health. But it will tell you where you are now, and you can take that into a counseling or spiritual direction relationship or coaching, which is what I do. And so if you are interested in being coached on spiritual health, and you want to take the GPS, take it, and you can email me, or I'll follow up with you if you take the GPS. I have 43 other GPS coaches as well, that if you're looking for a woman to work with, or whatever it is that you're looking for, I can refer you out as that as well, if you want to work specifically on the GPS. But well, that is I have come in shy of an hour. We can meditate for the next minute and a half before questions and answers, or we can go right into questions and answers. But I want to thank you first for your attention and being here with me, so that that I'm not speaking out into some internet void. But I have felt you were here with me, and I appreciate it. And I am open to any questions that you have, or conversation you want to have. We've got like 30 minutes or something like that?
Yeah, about 30 minutes. Can you pull that down to where we can see a bigger you than, or did you want to leave your screen up?
Nope.
So I'm going to take the privilege of asking the first question. When you did this research and developed this tool, what was the most surprising thing that came out of it for you?
Yeah, well, one, that I would be doing this, what I'm doing right now, that was a surprise. But I was really surprised as to, I've never done an instrument like this before. I worked with an expert in psychometric assessment, and this thing blew the roof off the numbers. And I don't know how that happened. I don't really know how that happened. So this came out, much more statistically sound than I ever would have expected. Again, because it was very intuitive for me, not so much I knew what I was doing in developing this type of instrument. So that was the thing.
So as a follow-up to that, what do you think the most practical finding is out of this? Where do you see the most usefulness for this?
Yeah, and another surprise is that it would find use in the medical world, and so that is, I think right now is, I really think, and I'm hoping that, you know, as I work with hospitals, what we'll be able to establish pretty firmly that this kind of work decreases burnout, because the church, for instance, teaches about love God, love neighbor, but they don't teach about self that much. Most churches don't. So people do not grow up with a basic education in personhood. And so they give, but they, you know, they give themselves away essentially. So hospital workers and pastors and, you know, caregiving workers are in desperate need of this kind of attention.
Cedric has a question regarding a comment you just made where you said it blew the numbers off. What did you mean by that?
Well, when you look at in terms of the Chrome Alpha numbers and the, you know, in terms of reliability, they came in much higher than would, you could say it's valid at a certain range, and it was much higher than the valid number. And again, that is not my expertise, and I relied on an expert to tell me that. And so that's what he told me. But you know, I have all the findings, and I share them freely with anybody that wants to see the numbers.
Somebody had asked for a copy of one of the particular slides. Is that, well, I will tell everybody that we will have this posted to our website or our YouTube. I believe it's put onto our YouTube channel. Dina, do you recall if that's correct?
It is, yeah.
If you go to our website and click on the YouTube button, give us a day or two and we'll have the whole presentation back up there. And then Paul, do you have a way to let anybody have a copy of those slides or that particular slide? Would there be a way to arrange that?
Yeah, I can put this into a PDF and send that to, should I just send it to you?
Yeah, send it to me, and then what we'll do is we'll have Kerrigan, our office manager, send that on to anybody that would like a copy of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That would work. So opening it up, who else has got questions I see my fan club, people are saying they like me in response to your claim that maybe they won't. So
I love Dan. I more than like Dan. I love Dan.
You were going to ask something, Dina?
No, I said, I think one person said they like you.
No, it's up to 2 or 3 now. Who else has got questions for Dr. Burns?
Well, I'll follow up with mine.
Okay.
I figured you might have been talking about reliability, but it's been a long time since I took statistics. But you know, in that natural, I mean, in my mind, there's like a control group, and then there's some kind of intervention, and then the correlation is at a certain level of reliability. This probably did lead to this. So this intervention probably did produce these at a high reliable level. I didn't get a sense of your research as being like that. So that's why.
Yeah, with a psychometric assessment, it's internal consistency. It's about whether or not it's about two things. It's about do the test items measure what it says that it measures, and do the test items express the factors of the assessment. So what was confirmed was the factors, that the God part and the self-differentiation part and the empathy part. I started with 6 factors, and it basically collapsed it into 3 factors. And so those are the critical factors. And then within those factors, the test items accurately describe the factor and accurately measure what it says it measures. So it's all kind of an internal thing. There's other studies that could be done, based on its effectiveness in producing results. And we're just a year and a half into this, and we're working on all those things.
Very good.
Thank you.
Hey, Paul, you were talking about using this as a device to help people measure or to monitor burnout, for example, or a way to, as a tool to walk with that. How long does it actually take to take the, to complete the instrument?
Usually about 15 minutes.
Okay.
It's 70 items, and they're pretty, they're not math problems, so they go pretty fast.
Okay.
And then as soon as you complete it, you'll get an email with the results.
Got it. Okay, because in my mind, I do a couple of support groups for some physician and some hospital groups, and this may be a way that they could tie into that to help monitor employee burnout, as you say, or where they're at as a tool to watch what they're doing for self-care.
Yeah, if you see high empathy with low self-differentiation, the higher the degree of difference between those two things, is basically going to be at least pointing towards the potential for burnout.
Yeah, I mean, that describes most every healthcare worker I've ever run into.
Yeah. And I'd love to get a further study completed on that, but I'm going to guess, though, that the higher the delta between those two things, you could tell. And then when the burnout happens, the empathy score crashes. So they go from they goes back down to their self-differentiation level. It's all they can handle. And so if I see a person's score is their empathy is about equal or less than their self-differentiation, it may indicate that burnout's already happening. May not, but.
So I think I want to thank you so much for your beautiful words about D2 and really appreciate that, Paul. And really am intrigued by your work to try to put some sort of quantitative measure, and it sounds like you did some form of factor analysis to actually have these factors fall out is just fascinating to me. And I have a couple of curiosities. One is if you could talk a bit more on self-differentiation. Many people on this lecture tonight are in the healthcare industry. And so, we're usually pretty good at empathy. What I heard you say is, the farther apart self-differentiation and empathy are, the higher the chance of burnout. Yeah. So if you could talk about self-differentiation. Second part of my question is, you said that what came out as the lowest score was something that was curious to me, was the, I don't know if it was an expression of vulnerability. So if you could speak a bit more to that. So those two things. So
let's start with self-differentiation. And, classically self-differentiation is the ability to distinguish one's thoughts and one's feelings from another person or a system, So the lack of self-differentiation is that you only think and feel as the group thinks and feels, or another person, and that would be called codependency. And so your well-being is totally reliant upon, acceptance by a person or the group. And so you don't think or feel differently than that. And so what happens with a person that's undifferentiated is that they get lost. One of two extremes. They get lost in the feelings around them, which in a hospital is very dangerous. You can get lost in fear, panic, depression, all those things. And then on the other side, is more the narcissistic end, is to where you simply project your thoughts and feelings and assume everybody has those same thoughts and feelings. And so you just can't see people. And so you only see images of yourself everywhere and are disappointed and confused when they're not like you. And so, at any rate, so in terms of my model, there's a different spin on it, because this is about personhood. It's about knowing who you are and who you aren't. In my model, it's related to attachment. So can you really be out there on your own, unattached as your own person? Or is it like what Jim Wilder said, is that our character is formed by who we love? So if that's the case, then our sense of self is connected to our attachments. And so in the case of, my faith, attaching to God gives me the security needed to self-differentiate. So whether it be God or you need some supportive attachment, at least, even if it's kind of a surrogate attachment, like a therapist would be a good version of that helps you. You lean on them emotionally to some degree, and they encourage your self-differentiation. So you still always need the safety, and to self-differentiate from a family can be a very dangerous feeling thing. So it requires some security. It's going to require secure attachment, I think, to do it well. So whether it be with God or some other source. On the vulnerability side, vulnerability is the thing that is necessary to have a relationship. And to express and receive love requires vulnerability. To receive some kind of healing, to receive forgiveness, that requires disclosure, and that's vulnerability. And so we begin to cover up when we are made to feel unacceptable by people that are important to us, that we rely upon. And so we begin our march against invulnerability usually at a pretty young age. And so we in fact, I've got one of these little Russian dolls, right? So get to the bottom of this. Got a person here. This is you, right? This little guy is you. But at some point, you became unacceptable. And so you became this guy. And then eventually then you went to work for somebody and you had to put on another layer, and then you got married and you had to put on another layer. And then all of a sudden you're lost in this doll figure. And so part of vulnerability, part of the necessity of becoming authentically you is to unmask yourself, and that requires vulnerability. And people are low because of shame, and low because of woundedness, and low because of lack of self-acceptances and things like that. I kind of get it what you were asking.
Yeah, you did. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Does anybody else have questions or thoughts? Curiosities?
Nobody else will speak. I always will.
Jump in there.
I spend a lot of time thinking about character. We need character education in high schools, and I have a list of things that people of good character do in relationships, etc. So I'm trying to put together my idea of character with yours. So I didn't know if 50 years ago they used the word character instead of personality. So as time has gone by, we start talking about personality. So I didn't know if you were just general personality, but the way you said something about character, it's the way you relate to people. So, I'm curious to have you elaborate more on your vision of how you think of the word character.
Yeah. Well, okay. So personality, at least in my understanding, personality, like if I took, Myers-Briggs, I've taken it multiple times. I took it when I was in college, and I took it when I entered the ministry, and it was the same. I am an INFP, and that's not likely to change that much. So personality is much more of a stable thing. And I don't know that it develops. And I don't necessarily know that it's who you are either. Myers-Briggs doesn't really tell me who I am. It tells me who I've become to survive in this world, perhaps. But character, that's kind of how I distinguish. I think character is something that develops, and it comes out of attachment, but it also comes out of intention and choices and habits. And so I think we kind of, in a way, we attach and work ourselves into a character, and it can change. People have character changes, and some for the better and some for the worse. And all of a sudden they care about other things, and or they, trauma. I wonder how trauma disrupts character. Many people, he's just not the same person anymore. Well, that's what trauma does, but trauma doesn't disrupt personality as far as I know. So it's a little bit hard for me to get my hands around, but that's kind of my best kind of bumbling and fumbling version of it, I guess.
Well, that was very interesting, and I have to push you just a little bit further, because you did say something that was very much like, the way somebody relates to somebody else. I think you said, I don't know, sort of people, places, and things, or something like that. But I didn't hear relates well, treats the other person well, interrelates in a way that has their needs and their in my mind.
Yeah.
That's what I think of as character.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's bad character too. But it is, it's seen, they shall be known by their fruits. Our character is seen in the way we relate to the world. So I think in terms of a measure of character, there is something in there that is a little hard to get your hands around, but you can see it in action. And you know people by, like, just an example is just that the advice you've probably heard, when you're dating somebody, pay attention to how they treat the wait staff, because that's how they're going to treat you in about a month. That's their character. And it's going to be, they may cover up their character for a little while, and we do cover up parts of our character, but we never really are acting out of our character. It's just who we are, or who we've become. Like I said, I'm working on this, Cedric.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Well, thank you so much, Paul. That was just incredibly interesting, and it's given me a lot to think about. One of the things that Daniel has said in groups is, what do you place on the altar that you worship? And that is really what you said. We become that which we hate and that which we love, the things that we are most attached to, whether good or bad. And that's a pretty profound concept. If we think about what we spend our time thinking about during the day, that gives us a good idea of where our attachments are.
Yeah.
So thank you for trying to quantify all that for us too.
You're welcome.
So we will meet again next week next month, sorry, and we will more than likely be on Zoom again. So we want to thank you all for staying with us in this changing environment. Daniel has posted in the chat that if you want CEUs or a copy of the slides, you can reach out to Kerrigan, which is KERRIGAN at d2counseling.com. If you don't remember that, you can always use info@d2counseling.com. Daniel, anything else you'd like to add to that?
Just remember, we are talking to the executive director of the 12-step ministry group. And so that'll be an interesting talk next time. And we want to thank Unity Church for continuing to co-host this with us. And I'm sure, as an optimistic participant here, I'm hopeful we will be back in person next time, but we'll see. We'll be flexible and we'll see how it goes. So everybody be careful. And I thank you all for attending. And Paul, thank you so much for tonight. And we look forward to working with you in the future. Take care.
It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Libby. Good to see everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.